What you see today as a glass and steel giant in North London began in the most unlikely place in Victorian England, amidst the smell of gunpowder and the deafening sound of hydraulic hammers. There was no glamour. There was no £1,000,000 investment. There were just 15 workers, a sixpence cow, and a field that looked more like an open sewer. This is the birth of Dial Square FC. The story of how an arms factory forged not just cannons, but the identity of the greatest club in the English capital. London, 1886. In the Woolwich district on the banks of the Thames, the Royal Arsenal complex was the war heart of the British Empire. Thousands of men worked day and night producing ammunition and heavy artillery. Among them was a Scottish mechanical engineer named David Danskin. He had an obsession, football. In an area dominated by rugby and cricket, Danskin saw in the sport of the masses the only escape from the brutal routine of the factory. In October of that year, he gathered his friends from the Dial Square workshop, named after the sundial above the factory entrance, and made a simple proposal. Let's buy a ball and form a team. Each of them, David Danskin, Elijah Watkins, and Richard Peirce, contributed 6 pence. Danskin himself added 3 shillings from his own pocket. They had the ball. Now they needed an identity. December 11, 1886. Dial Square FC crossed the river for its first match against Eastern Wanderers. The location, Isle of Dogs. Accounts from the time described the pitch as a swampy ditch. But the hunger of those workers was greater than the mud. The result was a massacre 6-0 that afternoon. Under the biting cold of London, those men felt they had something special in their hands. 2 weeks later, on Christmas Day, they gathered at the Royal Oak, pub next to Woolwich Arsenal Station. Amid toasts and pipe smoke, they decided that the name of the workshop was too small for their ambition. Dial Square FC died there to give way to the Royal Arsenal. But for the world, they would be immortalized by a nickname that carried the identity of those forgers, the Gunners. If you walk the streets of Holloway today and observe the sea of red shirts, you'll see a symbol that transcends sport, the cannon. But for Arsenal fans, this isn't just a marketing logo created in an air-conditioned meeting room. It's a seal of genealogy. Every time a player like Bukayo Saka or Martin Odegaard kisses that shield, he's unconsciously paying tribute to a lineage of artillery that defended the borders of the British Empire long before the first offside rule was written. The club didn't adopt the cannon for aesthetics. It was forged within a military complex. The Royal Arsenal at Woolwich was a city within a city, from a labyrinth of foundries where metal was transformed into weapons of destruction. Those workers were called gunners, not because they scored goals, but because they manufactured the ammunition that fueled the Royal Navy fleets. The current logo is merely a modern echo of a Victorian coat of arms that boasted 3 colossal cannons, a mark of power, precision, and a force that, once unleashed, was impossible to stop. Working at the Royal Arsenal in 1886 wasn't just a job, it was a daily test of survival. Imagine a 1,300-acre complex where the sky was permanently stained by a toxic haze of sulfur and coal. The sound was a deafening industrial symphony of hydraulic hammers and high-pressure steam. There, silence was a luxury no one knew. Inside the Dial Square workshop, the beating heart of this industrial monstrosity, danger was a fellow workbench worker. Men spent grueling shifts of up to 12 hours shaping projectiles and calibrating telescopic sights. The environment was so volatile that a single mistake, a dropped tool, or an ill-timed spark could cause a chain reaction that would turn miles of Woolwich to ashes. It was known as the Village of Fear. For the 15 pioneers who would found the club, football emerged as the only escape valve from that unbearable pressure. They needed something that didn't smell of gunpowder, They needed a pitch, however muddy, where they could cease to be mere extensions of machines and recover their human dignity. Dial Square FC was born from the desperate desire to breathe fresh air in a world suffocated by iron. In the heart of this labyrinth of gears and steam, one figure stood out: David Danskin, a Scottish mechanical engineer of only 23 years old who had crossed the border from Burntilland to Woolwich in search of work. Danskin was not just a skilled technician. He was a man of vision in a place where most could only look at the ground. In Scotland, he had seen football flourish as an urban religion, and looking at his colleagues in the Dial Square workshop, he saw something no one else saw: an army without a flag. Danskin realized that isolation and exhaustion were destroying the souls of those men. In October 1886, he made a bold decision. He didn't ask permission from the supervisors or the factory directors to create a recreational guild. He simply walked among the workbenches and proposed to his peers, "Let's put together a team that is as strong as the steel we forge." He needed 15 men willing to be the pillars of something new. He wasn't looking for elite athletes. He was looking for workers hungry for identity. The exact moment of Arsenal's birth didn't happen on a pitch, but on a grease-stained workshop workbench. That afternoon in 1886, Danskin placed his own hat on the table and issued the challenge. To buy a genuine leather ball, an absolute luxury item at the time, he needed capital. He asked each of the 15 volunteers for 6 pence. For those men, this wasn't small change. It was the price of 3 or 4 pints of beer, a small fortune on a subsistence budget. One by one, they accepted the pact. The sound of copper coins clinking on the workshop wood was the first announcement that Dial Square FC was real. Danskin himself, in an act of absolute leadership, took 3 more shillings from his own pocket to complete the amount. With the money in hand, he didn't just buy a piece of sports equipment, he bought the club's first heart. When that heavy, rough, raw leather ball was first placed on the workshop table, the silent tool, the Industrial Revolution was interrupted by a feeling Woolwich had never seen before: hope. With the ball bought and the team formed, the essential thing was missing: a pitch. On December 11, 1886, the workers of Dial Square left behind the smoke of Woolwich and boarded a steamboat on the Thames. That river, which carried raw materials to the factory, now carried the hope of a new club. The destination, Isle of Dogs? This was no professional pitch. It was a desolate swamp, battered by the cold December wind and covered in puddles of muddy water. The pitch, better known as Millwall Docks, was as inhospitable as the factory they had left. On the other side awaited Eastern Wanderers, an already established team, accustomed to the harshness of those conditions. But for the gunners, the mud was not an obstacle. It was the natural extension of their working environment. With each step on the waterlogged ground, they carried the weight of expectation, not only to win, but to prove that life beyond the forge was possible. Under a grey winter sky, the opening whistle blew. What followed was not just a football match, it was a declaration of intent. Dial Square, wearing borrowed uniforms and with the determination of workers fighting for every inch, dominated Eastern Wanderers. That muddy pitch, which should have been an obstacle, became the stage for a massacre. The final score 6-0, a humiliating victory for the experienced Eastern Wanderers and a battle cry for the newly born Dial Square. On that cold afternoon, David Danskin's team showed that the same strength and precision required in weapons manufacturing could be transferred to the football pitch. 2 weeks later, at the Royal Oak pub, celebrating the overwhelming victory, the founders decided that the name Dial Square was too small. They were more than a workshop, they were the pride of Woolwich. That Christmas, Dial Square FC died to give way to Royal Arsenal FC. The cannon, which once adorned the factory, was now the symbol of a club born to shine. Royal Arsenal now had a name, a ball, and an ironclad reputation, but they lacked a visual element to unite them, a uniform. At that time, football was still groping for its visual identity, and for a group of working-class men living paycheck to paycheck, buying a complete set of identical shirts was an almost insurmountable financial challenge. They were an army, but they looked like a bunch of ragamuffins playing in the work clothes they wore in the workshops. The solution didn't come from London, but from a connection to the past. Two of the founders, Fred Beardsley and Maurice Bates, were former Nottingham Forest players who had moved to Woolwich in search of work at the arms factory. In an act of desperation and camaraderie, they wrote to their old club asking for help. Arsenal didn't have a colour. They needed an identity that wasn't the grey of the factory ashes. Nottingham Forest's response was a gesture of generosity that would forever alter the aesthetics of English football. They sent a package containing a complete set of shirts and a brand new ball. But it wasn't just any red. It was dark red, a deep, sober madder red. For the Woolwich workers, those shirts weren't just uniforms, they were armour. By wearing that colour for the first time, Royal Arsenal ceased to be merely an extension of the workshop and became a visually imposing entity. What began as a charitable favour between neighbouring clubs ended up becoming the foundation of one of the most valuable brands on the planet. Decades later, when the legendary Herbert Chapman decided to add the white sleeves, he was merely refining what Destiny had already traced in 1886. That red represented the heat of the forges, the blood of the workers, and the passion that was about to ignite North London. Arsenal now had a crest, a name, and finally its colour. But why that specific shade? Why wasn't Arsenal born with the vibrant red we see today? The answer lies in the chemistry of the Victorian era. The shipments sent by Nottingham Forest contained shirts in a shade known as madder red. At that time, synthetic dyes were still an expensive novelty. For a group of workers who could barely afford the rent, the luxury was having matching shirts, no matter the color. The madder pigment was extracted from the root of the Rubia tinctorum plant. It was a natural, affordable dye that was extremely resistant to fading. Furthermore, madder red had a key advantage for those going straight from the workshop to the field. It was dense and dark. It was a color that camouflaged grease stains that wouldn't come out in the wash, and the soot that impregnated the skin of those men. Those shirts were everyday combat gear. Arsenal became red because it was the color of resistance to wear and tear. It was the color that allowed the worker to enter the field without looking defeated by the dirt of the factory. What is now a global elite brand began as a utility uniform, made of heavy, inexpensive wool to withstand the rigors of those who had nothing to lose. What began with 15 workers sharing the cost of a leather ball in a noisy workshop ended irreversibly. Royal Arsenal was no longer just a factory team. It was an idea in motion. They proved that the sweat of hard work and the precision of the engineer could create a beauty London had never seen. The arms factory had fulfilled its role. It gave the club its name, its colour, and its tenacity. But the horizon was now bigger than the walls of Woolwich. Arsenal was ready to cease being a worker's secret and become the master of the capital. The foundation was complete. The next step, the conquest. This documentary details the founding of Arsenal and its working class origins. If you found this content helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel to follow the next parts of this historical series. Turn on notifications to receive the next episode, where we will discuss the move to the north and the beginning of the Great London rivalries. Leave your opinion in the comments Did you already know the details of the Dial Square workshop? Until next time.